The government yesterday unveiled Atmanirbhar Bharat 3.0 and are hoping that the Indian economy is on the path for recovery. To talk about that and the state of the economy, joining us now is the Economic Affairs Secretary, Mr. Tarun Bajaj. Mr. Bajaj, appreciate you taking your time out and speaking with us today at ET Now. Let me first begin by asking you about the state of the economy. Even if we consider that India will move on a path to recovery, there is going to be a significant difference in the output gap. There's going to be a significant difference in the economic output this year vis-a-vis last year. How soon do you expect India to get back on the path to recovery, get back on, in the positive growth trajectory?
Let me first say that there have been various estimates which have been made by economists and by various agencies which was showing a large contraction, but they themselves are now actually revising their estimates and coming up with much lower contractions. The Reserve Bank of India also in its report has said that we might see a positive growth in the third quarter itself. So obviously in the fourth quarter we should have a much better growth. So I would say that rather than saying when or where, I would say the way we were anticipating, we meaning all of us were anticipating, the recovery has been much faster and much speedier than what we all thought. And if we are able to hit the positive territory in the third quarter and then grow further in the fourth quarter, we, I think, are on the right path. And yes, this has been a difficult year, but we would be much better off than many other countries.
What's been your assessment of the festive season so far? If you go to the markets, it seems that even businessmen are cautiously optimistic at this point of time. Initially, they were facing some sort of supply side hurdles which are now being eased significantly. What's been your own experience? You've been speaking to stakeholders. What are you hearing in terms of the outlook in this festive season, and how critical, most importantly, is it going to be?
Look, I'll answer that question in two ways. One is what the associations are telling me when I speak to the members of FICCI or CII. So all of them are optimistic, and today I can say that for the car industry or the motor vehicle industry, while I was talking to them 3 months ago and discussing as to what we should do to help them come out of the crisis, today they are saying that we don't have time to talk. We are actually producing so that we can supply our cars and our scooters to the customers. So that is, I think, a very positive sign. Having said that, there are certain sectors which are still stressed, the tourism, the civil aviation sector, and yesterday's policy is trying to address that issue. But we feel that as the lockdown further loosens in terms of the restrictions on these sectors, people would start moving and we would see better out there also.
Yesterday I was speaking with continue.
So what, Ruchi, I also wanted to speak to you anecdotally. What I sometimes do is that rather than going home straight from my office, I go via some markets. So without realizing that...
Last time you didn't buy anything, that's what I do know.
No, I'll tell you, yesterday or was it day before? Yes, yesterday was Dhanteras or today? Yesterday. So day before I was in the market, and let me tell you, I entered a particular store and I came out because I thought everything was available free. It was so crowded. So anecdotally, I'll say this.
I want to know, did you buy anything?
Yeah.
Since
my wife was there with me, so she bought.
Okay, that's good to know. That's heartening to know. Having said that, sir, I must ask you in terms of, yesterday when I was speaking with the principal economic advisor, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal as well, and he told me that we will make sure that we will keep some of these stress sectors like tourism, like hospitality alive. Up until now, we've seen only liquidity support being given to these sectors, and it is still some time away that the services sector completely gets back to normal. Will we see maybe the next set of announcements or the next set of stimulus or maybe in the budget some sort of a healing touch being given to these sectors as well?
Ruchi, I'll also say that in the yesterday's announcement also there is an element of fiscal support to these sectors. These sectors actually, a lot of people have lost their jobs. So as these sectors come back, we hope that they will start recruiting people again. So even if you count just the employers' contribution that we would be paying for people who are earning less than 15,000 rupees. So 12% of their salary would actually be borne by the Government of India. So to that extent, that is definitely a support, and this support is over and above the earlier support, similar support that was given to them. So I would say that we will watch the situation and take steps. I would also like to mention to you that the message that I am getting is that once we are able to give confidence to people that this disease is now on its way out, I think people will come out with a vengeance, and the sectors that are stressed will receive the maximum number of people coming to them.
But isn't that still some time away? We're yet to hear from, from any of the major pharmaceutical companies in terms of the vaccine rollout as well. In fact, Pfizer said that their vaccine is about 92% effective. There are many more other candidates as well. Here in India also, Serum Institute is working on that front. And while we're talking on vaccine, does that mean that perhaps even though the vaccine is going to take some time to come, the fiscal support, the policy support will continue on part of the government's side?
You know, that's what I said. We have just made a set of announcements yesterday. So it's very difficult for me to tell you today that we'll make the next announcements tomorrow. So we will watch the situation and we'll act accordingly. Having said that, I would also like to say, for example, marriages is a big festival in India. So there were no marriages happening for the last 3-4 months. But now I actually see, I never imagined, I'm receiving so many invitations for marriages, which means that with this loosening of number of people, so people are actually hosting these marriage functions. So I'm saying that while the situation is not normal, but it is gradually improving and we should see improvement, I'm sure we will take enough steps to ensure that none of the sectors the stress actually continues there.
Okay, that's heartening to know. So having said that, the budget making exercise has already kick-started in Finance Ministry. Just want to understand from you, even though today we've heard from Finance Ministry that ideas and suggestions are being sought for the next budget. In terms of the direction, what are going to be the focus areas for the next budget? Because up until now we've seen a lot of emphasis being given to infrastructure. Is that really going to continue in the next budget as well? And what about healthcare as well?
I think both these things should actually see some effort in the budget. The infrastructure should continue, because if you want the economy to grow, I think it is infrastructure which is the most important part from the government side in terms of capital expenditure. And health, obviously. Health, I am sure the vaccine and otherwise also trying to upgrade our health infrastructure would also be one of the areas that we should be seeing, but it's too early for me to comment. We have just asked for the comment. We've released the press release today, and you're asking me what the budget would contain. Very difficult.
We are the press. And which is why the question. Having said that, sir, since the budget making exercise has already kick-started, if you look at the revenue position, that's been a major challenge so far. Profitability, individual spending, still nowhere close to what it used to be last year. Having said that, what kind of fall are you estimating in terms of revenues now that the budget making exercise is already underway?
You know, we will come to the Parliament to mention those figures sometime in February. So by that time we'll have a better idea of where the revenues are. But let me say this to you, that when we started the year or April or May when I came here, the revenues were looking very dismal and we didn't know how we will actually run throughout the year. But as you yourself have reported that there is some uptick in the revenues, and we actually crossed 1 lakh crores on GST last month, and I'm sure we will have a similar picture this year. And there are some other revenues. For example, I'm also hoping that the income tax and the corporate tax, which was expected to degrow a lot, will actually not degrow so much. And in the last quarter we have actually seen, and I think all the papers and the media is also reporting that some of the results are better. This is also obvious for the fact that once the economy starts growing, people start buying out, which is happening when we see the indicators. So that will also have an impact on the bottom line of these companies. And some of the companies are actually doing better than what they did last year, the FMCG,
Right.
the pharmaceutical companies. Impact will be there. I don't say impact will not be there, but we are better off than what we thought.
Having said that, sir, since you're saying that you're expecting that at least on the direct tax front there will be some sort of a recovery coming in, and we may not degrow as much as we had anticipated in the past. But a lot of analysts and economists at this point of time are saying that perhaps there's going to be a contraction of close to 40% in terms of revenues. I mean, there's going to be a fall of as much as 40% in terms of the revenues that the government had projected in the last budget. Do you concur with that figure?
Ruchi, I would not like to comment on the exact figure. As I said, as we are growing from month to month, I'm seeing improvements in the figures that is happening. 40% is too large a number. I think it should be much lesser than that. But we'll see how does it go.
You also spoke about the big impetus for infrastructure as well. In fact, one of the agencies recently reported that the state governments, state governments that already play a large role in infrastructure projects as well, and contribute close to 37 to 40% of the total infrastructure investment into the country. Given the fact that they're facing weak revenues, infrastructure push on their end is going to be very tough. I want to understand from you, from the central government's point of view, how are you telling states to invest more on infrastructure, and will this push by the central government continue in light of states not really being able to play a major role as had anticipated?
Okay, let me answer this question in two ways. First, the resources of the states. Yes, in the first half, there were a lot of issues. We didn't know how the pandemic will go. So there may have been some states which were being conservative on their expenditure. But with the GST compensation cess having been sorted out, with the 0.5% over and above 3% given to them for further borrowing, and that has been now topped up by another 0.5%, so 4% of that, and plus the GST compensation cess. So we feel now the states have a feeling that they have enough revenues in this particular year. So that is one aspect which I think is taken care of, that the concern of the states in terms of they not having enough revenues has been taken care of. So we think that the infrastructure spend should come. The Government of India on its part has done 2-3 things. One, in the last announcements that we made, we actually announced some infrastructure spend by the states and gave them a loan for 50 years, which was interest free. So that was, though symbolic, but it was a message to them that you need to spend on infrastructure. Secondly, through persuasions and meetings which various ministries are having with the state governments, we are actually telling them that they should spend on infrastructure. Third is that there are some projects in which the central government also contributes, the state governments also contribute. So if the central government releases the share, there is some pressure on the state governments to release their share. So I accept the point that there is a concern, but we are working towards it, and I'm sure in the next 3-4 months and the months in the next financial year, we should see a better spend by them on infrastructure.
All right, let me ask you about the revenue concerns. And because you said that at least on the tax front, you're expecting that some of the gap will be filled in, at least on the corporate tax front as well as direct taxes. On the other hand, in terms of proceeds that we're expecting, divestment seems to be a glaring gap. There were a lot of things that were in the pipeline which the government hasn't been able to pretty much work on, and everything is now going to be bunched up in the last one quarter. BPCL, Air India, IDBI privatization, there's a lot that's lined up. How soon will we see the government really move on it? How hopeful are you that during these COVID times as well, there will be takers for these companies?
The message that I'm getting from my colleague, I don't know details about it, but the message that I'm getting from my colleague is that there is a lot of interest in all the companies that you mentioned, and the deals actually should go through. Now, whether they go through by the end of March or they go through in April is something we still need to see. But I think I saw him in the media today giving an interview, so I'm sure he must have mentioned, though I didn't hear him out there. But in the meeting, he was saying that he's pushing it hard and we should see some good results there. We also need to understand one thing, that this is COVID times, so difficult times. People actually want to come and look at the assets. They are not able to do that. Secondly, what happens is that it is after a long time that the government of India is attempting to sell something to the private sector.
Right.
So obviously in the first deal that you do, it takes a little more time, but I'm sure with experience that has been gained with these 2 or 3 deals, we'll be much faster in the days to come.
My last question to you, and that has to do with PSUs, Finance Ministry. In fact, Deepam, and I know it is mostly handled by your other colleague, but I must ask you, PSUs are always seen as cash cows, and now once again we're seeing the government asking PSUs to give dividends on a quarterly basis. A lot of people have raised concerns that this will impact the company's profitability. What does Finance Ministry have to say on that?
I don't agree that it will impact the profitability. The dividends are paid below the line, so it's after the profits that the dividends are paid to the government, so it doesn't affect their profitability. I'm sure Deepam is actually doing this work. It must be looking into it, but most of my PSUs have very little leverage, so I think that is also a matter which gives comfort to the investor. So I don't think that should be a concern. And wherever if you were talking of the buyback of shares, there also the reserve position and the other, and in fact it will raise the value of the company if such a buyback actually succeeds. So I think there is nothing to be concerned about the PSUs. The PSUs are owned by the government of India, so we would be as much concerned about the PSUs as the PSUs themselves are.
And get as much money as possible?
I would say we are not getting as much money as some of the private sector companies are giving that money. So I would say the other hand, if you look at the returns that the government is actually getting from the money that we have spent on these PSUs, it would be much lesser. So I think it is the other way around. But there has to be pressure on the PSUs that they need to perform and they need to give returns on equity.
Right. You've also been monitoring the capex plans of these PSUs also fairly regularly. What has been the assessment so far on that?
On that, the first quarter obviously was not very good, and there was COVID time, so we were fighting health. We didn't know how the virus would behave. But second quarter onwards, there has been good progress, and most of them have actually promised to the finance minister that they would do 100%, and I'm sure they would reach that figure because the sensitization of them has actually happened and they are working towards it.
Okay, all right. On that note, appreciate you taking your time out and speaking with us today at DT now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.